Hi, my name is David Sisco. My pronouns are he, him, and welcome to season 2 of my little podcast that could, Wholehearted Voice Pedagogy. This podcast is dedicated to the art and practice of teaching singers. It is an extension of my book of the same title, which was released by Routledge Press in July 2025. You can find it on Amazon, Routledge.com, and anywhere you get your books. I hope you are listening to this podcast after a very meaningful and joy-filled holiday season. This is my favorite time of year, second only to the beginning of the school year. The new year has always inspired for me a time of reflection and renewal. My husband Albert and I spent the weekend before New Year's going through our entire apartment and purging clothes and other things that we didn't need. Everything is organized within an inch of its life. Well, even more organized than it was before. We're both pretty type A personalities. I even made space on my computer's hard drive and cleared out my email, which is perennially on the verge of requiring more gigabytes. Not today, Google. Not today. So as I am in this reflective mood, I thought it might be nice to look back at some of my favorite moments from the first season of the podcast. And I also want to spend some time talking to you about what's to come on the second season. What could be more New Year's-y than that? So let's dive in. If you're familiar with my book, you may recall that the main thrust of it is that we as teachers need to invest in developing healthy, boundaried relationships with students in order for them to do their best work. And yet, because we work one-on-one with students in the voice studio, this kind of relationship development can often be tricky. For as long as I have been teaching, I have heard from my colleagues, rightfully so, that voice teachers are not therapists. We have to be very mindful to stay in our lane. And yes, that is certainly true, but what I've personally discovered is that because many of us are eager not to cross a line with our students, we may have not investigated what is similar and different between the work we do with singers and the work a therapist does with their clients. And I wanted to get to the bottom of that. Enter my dear friend and colleague, Dr. Ritu Agarwal. We had a really fascinating conversation about the similarities and differences between voice teachers and therapists. And as we were talking about similarities, Ritu shared this very interesting tidbit about dyadic regulation. Take a listen.
I think working from the framework of the affect regulation polyvagal theory, fundamentally, we're both dyadic regulators that work with individuals.
Oh, say more about that. That's
Yeah, well,
scratching my itch.
is it? Well, I mean, I think, and this is, if people who know this will be like, duh, everybody's a dyadic regulator, because here's how dyadic regulation works. Like, as mammals, we bear children that don't have, we bear infants that don't have brain capacity. It's very, what's the word I'm trying to say? I'm getting nervous. Essentially, their rudimentary brain capacity that needs to develop, and it develops so it can calibrate in the time and space in which they were born. Right? So it's like
Sure.
they need time to calibrate. So they don't have a lot of intricacies in their brain functioning. And the way that they learn that is through another person, through a primary caregiver. And so if they're feeling something within their body, they might say, oh, this doesn't feel good. And a caregiver's job is to help them regulate that feeling, dyadically regulate it, to say, oh, you are eating for the first time. This is really uncomfortable. Or, oh, no, there is something wrong. We should be a little bit more concerned. This feeling doesn't feel good.
Yeah.
Right. So we learn to regulate ourselves through a supportive regulator, fundamentally.
Yeah.
And as teachers and as therapists, I think what we're doing when we're sitting with somebody who's learning, we're doing something very similar. Where we're sitting, we're saying, you're going to use my auxiliary mind, my ability to regulate my feeling, thinking, and behaving to be able to be more of yourself.
I
So I think,
love that. Yeah, that makes perfect sense. That's so
right?
much more erudite and put together than I could have done. So
This idea of dyadic regulation or co-regulation is a theme that kept cropping up over the course of the season. As my colleague Marcia Lesser noted in episode 5, our ability to help students co-regulate during their lessons creates an environment that is what she calls safe enough for learning to occur. If our students don't feel safe, that will impact their learning and certainly, of course, their singing as well. So the term of dyadic regulation really stuck with me. In the final episode of the season, I had the pleasure of interviewing Dr. Brian Manternach, who recently released a wonderful book, part memoir, biography, and pedagogical text entitled Voices of Influence. In it, he interviews his mentor, Dr. Robert J. Harrison, about the art of teaching, while also reflecting on his experiences as a teacher. He currently is an associate professor at the University of Utah. In the following clip, Brian gives a great example of co-regulation through the use of humor. In chapter 4, you note that Bob quipped, one of the most important elements of teaching is that sometimes to make a point, you have to make a circus. While amusing, there's some science behind this, and I was wondering if perhaps you wouldn't mind explaining a little bit.
Absolutely. So one of my other great mentors is Lynn Helding. Lynn Helding was she teaches at University of Southern California. She, for 10 years, wrote the Mindful Voice column in the Journal of Singing. Her book, The Musician's Mind, came out around 2020, 2021 maybe. And she teaches for our Summer Vocology Institute every summer. So her book really has influenced me quite a bit on how it is that people learn and how we might adjust our teaching to better impact learning. And she's very good to cite all of the sources in her book, but so many of them I just attribute to her because it was her where I learned them. But she points out a couple of times that memories are more deeply embedded when in our minds and our psyches when they're accompanied by strong emotions. So we think of an example like your wedding day or the birth of a child or graduation, right? These big moments, senior recital, right? So we tend to have strong emotions, and so we tend to have more accurate memories because of the strong emotions. So this unfortunately also works with traumatic events too, right? We remember traumatic events because of the negative emotions that are associated, but we tend to have there is often a great level of detail that we can recall after in those events. And so I think if we get too analytical in our lessons, in our teaching, then it keeps things sort of cerebral, as opposed to creating a circus and being silly and exploring and having fun and being willing to do sometimes some crazy things, to stand on your head or break dance across the room, if it might connect an emotion to a lesson that you're hoping to impart or wanting the student to explore. And sometimes I'll hear there was a couple of students who were preparing a recital, and it was a tense moment because their song was not going as well as they wanted it to. They're working on this duet, and they started to get a little snipey towards each other. And I stood up. I had a ground floor studio, and I said, "If this keeps up, I am leaving." And I got up and I opened the window and I jumped out the window. And they just broke out laughing, and I had to crawl back in through the window, and it created this sort of moment of levity. And it's like, okay, maybe we're getting too serious about what we're doing. This is supposed to be about emotion, expression, connecting with audiences, sharing a piece of ourselves. And so that they've graduated years ago now, but they still bring up that story and how it reminded them to just kind of not get too serious and just let go once in a while. So. Yeah. Finding ways that we can connect to emotion often have better pedagogical results as well. Go figure.
Yeah, I know. Who knew? It's so funny. I think, what in part you're talking about is just the importance of play, right? And how I find so often that, my students, will start to give themselves a voice lesson in front of me. Like, that's not your job. That's leave that for me. I'll do that. And become dysregulated as a result, right? And so a lot of times that play can bring them back into a place of regulation where they're going to be in connection and obviously do their best work because their diaphragm's not locking because they're not afraid.
Sure. Right.
Right.
Yeah. And I write about this in the book that Bob was just kind of an outrageous person by nature.
Socks.
Yeah. He has these ridiculously flashy socks and very fancy shoes and eyeglasses that are very eye-catching, and his personality is just larger than life. So to some degree, it always felt like he was such a brave person in the world to like bring the fullness of who he is unapologetically into the world, that it felt like we could unlock our own joy, our own discovery, our own keys to who we are. So we didn't have to mute our own light, our own brilliance, because he was just a walking example every lesson, every day of how you can just be out loud in the world.
Gosh, I love that. May we each strive to be that kind of example to our students, creating the right kind of circus to support their learning. One of the other central tenets of my book is the concept of student-centered learning. Certainly, this philosophy of teaching dates back to Confucius and Socrates, and yet it hasn't always been adopted in the voice studio. In episode 3, I sat down with my dear colleagues, Dr. Marisa Lee Naismith and Dr. Travis Sherwood, to discuss the differences between teacher and student-centered approaches to learning. Marisa generously shared this story of how she came to more deeply embody a student-centered teaching philosophy.
A few years ago, my mum passed away and I had to go and teach 2 weeks afterwards. I was very, very, very vulnerable. And I was doing a lot of work on myself before I went to teach at my job, where all I wanted to do was cry out aloud. I was in the depths of the grief. And so I started to do all this work on mindset and being present and being there for the student. And that year, I had the best results from my students that I had ever experienced. My students became the most highly expressive, most vulnerable in their storytelling I had ever had in all the years of teaching. And I truly believe it was because of the work that I was doing myself to make sure that I was present for them, that I was leaving all my biases at the door. We need to be aware of our own biases. We need to know how we feel about ourselves. We can't be self-centered and self-serving when we step into that voice studio. And that time when my mum passed away was such a strong example of what is possible if we truly do that work on ourselves, that we take care of ourselves, that we are emotionally present. We are there for our students. And I always used to say to my students when they first started work with me, look, I have a very specific way of teaching. I'm a little different to other teachers. I don't even know how to put a name to it, but I am a little different to other teachers. And I knew I taught differently to a lot of other teachers. And then when I saw Travis present in Vienna on student-centered learning, he put a name, he gave a name to the way that I teach and what I learned. And this was post my mum's passing. And I thought, that is the difference to what I'm seeing a lot of other teachers do. I'm actually doing a lot of the stuff. I still have a long way to go, but I am actually doing a lot of the stuff that Travis is talking about. And since then, the three of us have spoken about. So thank you, because through you two, I've learned and I've grown and I've become a better teacher through the conversations that we've had and what I've discovered in our journey together.
I continue to learn from Marisa and Travis, and we'll be presenting our research on student-centered learning at the Eurovox conference in New Lucerne, Switzerland this coming August. I hope we'll see you there. So if we agree that the student should be the center of their learning process, or at the center of their learning process, that means that we invite their culture and lived experiences into the voice studio, right? And in episode 19, I had a wonderful conversation with Dr. Noélia Luna Archambeault de Hernández about culturally responsive teaching after seeing her fascinating presentation on the subject at the ICVT conference in Toronto this past summer. One of the questions she asked during her presentation was, how do you make space for cultural identity in technique work? And as I told her, that question pierced me in the best possible way. And I asked her to give us an example of what that might look like. Here's what she said.
I always start conversations with new students as to, why are you here? Like, what's the goal? Let me help you get there, right? Even if, like we talked about earlier, they may not know exactly what that is, and those goals change over time. That's totally okay. But right now in the moment, this is what I'm interested in. This is kind of what brought me here. And I think that's always, whether it's somebody that wants to sing ranchera, or whether they want to sing spirituals, or if they want to sing heavy metal, or, something that they don't even know is part of a group identity or a personal identity, and trying to figure that out. I love it when they bring things that I haven't seen before, and we have to kind of do research together, because I think that actually will allow them the freedom to have the correct technique, if that's even a thing, right? I don't even like to use that term, but a technique that, as you said, is sustainable, and that's going to allow them to practice. It's going to allow them to explore, and hopefully allow them to be successful, right? I'll give this example. I know you heard this already in Canada, but I think it's one of the most profound examples. In fact, I was just meeting with the student. I told her that I might be using it as an example. She was like, please do. And that was the example I gave in Canada of a student that I had that was having a lot of trouble with vibrato in the classical sense. And so, and it was kind of frustrating for her. And so I said, okay, let's put that away, and let's look at something that, is more dear to your heart, more dear to your family. And she said, yeah. And so she brought in some Spanish music, but more of like ranchera, even some pop Spanish music. And I like that you hinted to that too. And when I was reading our topics for today. So the minute she started singing that music, she had vibrato. And I was not expecting it. So when she started singing and having vibrato, I was like, hold up. I said, did you hear it? Did you hear what you just did? Right. And she kind of smiled, and I said, you heard the vibrato, right? And she was like, yeah. And I said, so why is it that you can easily have it here, but we can't have it over here, right? So we had to together figure out what she was singing on that side. And I think, as we were talking about, she was singing with like her authentic full self in that music. And this classical repertoire was not feeling that for her, right? So finding a way to bridge that, right? Bridge the cultures in a way that would allow her to have sort of similar technique. Not that they're the same, but something that would sort of make sense and allow her to have vibrato in both, I think was super, to me, it was eye-opening. And it was mostly in part that we're allowing ourselves to do this in these spaces now, right? How great that I have another tool to use and help somebody get to where they need to. Now, this student does not want to be a classical singer. That's not their goal, but there is a chance she is going to be teaching others how to sing classically, whether that's in the K through 12 setting or the private studio. So it would be helpful for her to understand how to do that. And now, she's a grad student now. So like she's singing beautifully, and like she's got it. Like, it's really, really nice. And now we're going to help her through the next part of that journey.
Noélia's story echoes so many of the experiences I've had when students brought in repertoire they're really passionate about. And it taught me something about them and helped me operate with a clearer lens. This idea of centering a student's experience also came up in my conversation with Dr. Elizabeth Benson and Kate Rosen in episode 20, as we discussed fat liberation in the voice studio. In this clip, Elizabeth and Kate offer some great examples of how we can create environments that are truly inclusive of every body's experience.
It is my job as a voice teacher, I think, to foster a student's positive rapport with their body. So I'm very mindful about things that I say. For example, I have most of my students do a forward fold at the beginning of the lesson. I make sure to normalize accommodations about that. So I say, widen the stance, bend the knees, make it comfortable. The point here is that we're trying to open the back body. And while we're bending over, I take a minute to thank my back for all the things that it does for me. And I rarely give it, respite or repose or kudos, but it works so hard for me and I'm just so thankful. And then I'll take a deep breath and roll up and I feel different in my body because I have modeled something positive, and especially highlighting things like strength and endurance and all the things our body does for us, is a way that I can sort of indirectly infuse that positive rapport and encourage that with the student. And also things like anything with a bodywork modality, if you're doing any kind of stretching or getting up and down off the floor, making sure you have props, accommodations, using chairs, and that is all presented as an option for every student. It's not just an accommodation for people who you suspect can't do it the real way. And the real way isn't the best way, whatever that is. You want to sort of present different stages of, if you need a deeper stretch, you can add this. If you need a deeper stretch, you can do this. So that we're starting with something that is physically accessible for all people, regardless of their flexibility or body shape. And then you're moving into something more advanced for students who might be more flexible or need that next level. But I think that is something that, again, it's like Kate said, it's almost about what you don't say, rather than what you do say. And certainly if a student wants to have a direct conversation with me about their body, I have to make sure I, as a teacher, am comfortable with my body and talking about my body. And not that I'm going to during that conversation, but I can't be going, every time they say the word fat. If I'm very uncomfortable with that term and it's broadcast all over my face, the student may perceive that this isn't a safe topic for them to bring to me. So that's why I say I think mindset really matters, being a good listener and then responding with care and compassion, and affirming the student's own experience. Students will always know their bodies better than I ever could. And I think us as teachers having respect for that, for their awareness or lack of awareness about what they're feeling, is important. So I think paying attention to that, nonverbal communication, and just being really mindful of being gentle. There's also a certain amount of kind of vigilance that we can have as voice teachers too, to make sure that we're not broadcasting fat phobia in things like competitions or rubrics that have to do with attire or appearance. The word flattering is a very coded word that is a word I no longer use at all. I just say, please feel comfortable in your clothing and be able to move and do everything you need to do. It should be, this level of formality, and that's it. Like you don't need to talk about how tight or how loose it is or how low cut it is or how, where the hemline falls. And so again, I think it's about kind of more neutralized language, and making sure that we are checking our own bias, which may be previously infused in a lot of the things that we do, and trying to move forward in a different way, in a more inclusive way.
Can I piggyback one more thing off of that?
Please.
Just want to add that a lot of the advice that we're giving here really ought to be applied to all bodies, that this is not really specific to fat bodies, but it particularly benefits fat folks who may have had that type of trauma. But you really never know, looking at somebody, if they have had trauma in their body, if they have had trauma around other aspects of their lives, if they have had experience with anti-fat bias. You can generally assume that everyone in our world has encountered anti-fat bias, even if they're in a smaller body. Like, fat phobia actually hurts all of us.
Yep.
And so I think I just wanted to add that please feel free to extend this kind of loving approach and this like really linked into the way that your student is reacting, to all of your students, because this type of trauma can affect anybody, and it's outside of our scope of practice to find out who is traumatized.
Right.
We need to notice what's noticeable, and then move forward in the gentlest, most loving way.
Yeah,
Well said.
and
Thank you.
folks of all body sizes can experience body dysmorphia and eating disorders.
Yep.
So again, it is outside our scope of practice to know a student's trauma history. So I think the gentlest, safest approach is, again, that positive rapport with the body, because anyone who's had an eating disorder has some type of antagonistic relationship with their body that may make it very difficult for them to perceive their body and utilize their instrument, and to access all the parts of the instrument in a harmonious way. So I think it's probably safe to assume if you're female in the United States, you've probably had some kind of antagonistic moment with your body, and probably, folks of all genders. So, but certainly the larger society sends a lot of messages about what women are supposed to look like. I, as someone who's raised two teenagers, conditioned female, I can tell you that they are getting those messages loud and clear, regardless of what I'm saying at home. So it's definitely something to take into consideration for all students.
In each of these last couple of clips, what we're really underscoring is a commitment to a student-centered, culturally responsive, and equitable teaching approach that allows the students to feel seen and safe. But building that kind of space can be hard, especially if that is not the kind of creative, open-hearted atmosphere in which we work. In episode 16, I talked to Shevrin Venet, the author of Trauma-Informed, Equity-Centered Education, and I asked her about how to create safe, equitable spaces when we may not have input into the philosophy or operation of our institutions.
Sometimes we as teachers can feel like we're a cog in a very big hamster wheel. And often, that we don't have the bandwidth or the agency to kind of speak up and create change when we see inequitable policies or procedures. And I know I've certainly felt that way as an adjunct in my years of teaching. And I know in part 5, you underscore that teachers do have a lot of powers especially in the individual classrooms. And so even within inequitable spaces. And so I was just wondering if you could lift a couple of those up.
Yeah. So actually, it's funny, since I wrote this book, Equity-Centered Trauma-Informed Education, I actually have gotten versions of this question every single time I talk to teachers about it, because I think there's this sense of, yes, I really want to do all of this, and the environment is challenging, and the environment has only gotten more challenging since 2021 when this came out. And so I actually wrote a whole second book just about that question because I was getting it so much. The new book is called Becoming an Everyday Change Maker. And I really, in the whole thing, dive into this question of how do I find my influence and where do I make a difference, given that everything is terrible. And so just a couple of things that I highlight in there. One is to remember that this work is really big and we can't do everything. And so I often say to teachers, you can't do it all, but you can get started, right? We cannot fix every single equity issue that there is. We cannot solve for all of the problems in our education environments, but there's something that we can do. And what that something is going to depend kind of on the intersection of what do I care about, and then where are my skills? And so what I encourage teachers to do are to really think about, okay, let me first make a list of kind of what I was saying before. What are the equity issues I see? Maybe what are some of the challenges for my student population? What are the things that are kind of bugging me? And I sort of feel that need to make a difference. And then in taking that list, then separate out what do I have absolutely no control over? And then what do I have maybe some amount of influence over? So for example, if you are feeling, if you're an educator and you work at a college and you are feeling really stressed about the fact that the college is not affordable for the students, you probably have actually no influence over that. However, you might have influence over how students are being made aware of the resources that actually are available to them. I know that when I taught at a community college, we actually had a good number of grants that were available for student crisis or, different learning grants and things like that, but it wasn't really transparently communicated. And so one of the things that I could do is really bring those things to the forefront, make sure students really knew about them, bring it into my conversations when students were saying, oh, I'm having a hard time in class because my car broke down. I could say, oh, we actually have a grant fund for that. And so even though you may feel powerless about the big issue, there may be smaller pieces that you can do something about. And then the last piece of this that I encourage folks to think about in finding your area to make a difference is what are the particular skills that you have as a change maker, even if you don't think of yourself as a change maker. Some people really love to stand up in front of a crowd and say something, speak truth to power. Other people, that would send you into hiding for months, but maybe that person is really great at building connections. And so they can start to gather like-minded faculty and say, what could we collectively do about this? Other people are really good at organizing the email list and the Google Doc and all of that. And so maybe they're going to offer to do the behind the scenes work on an issue, right? And so in the new book, I have sort of a list of some of those types of skills so people can kind of do a self-assessment. But you can do that just on your own of thinking, what are the ways that I might contribute through the particular skills, things I'm good at? So what am I good at? What do I care about? And then what do I have influence over? And then find that unique thing that is yours to focus on. And when we all do that, it really creates a huge collective impact.
Our time is growing short, but I want to share two other moments from the last season that continue to stay with me as I've been planning this upcoming season. In episode 10, I had the fantastic conversation with Indian singer-songwriter Amer Khosla, who I've had the pleasure of teaching for the last several years. And we talked about the challenges of balancing technique and artistry. Take a listen.
I like that you sort of insist on curiosity, because I think to me, curiosity sort of contrasts like perfectionism and sort of absolute answers. And like as musicians, we're very guilty of perfectionism. And I think like the idea that like, oh, you're not getting this passage, that does not mean you're suddenly like you can't sing anymore, like, and that sort of sense of doom may even hit you, and it hits me sometimes, like, oh, I'm not getting this right, I can't sing. Like, so, but like, if you're sort of able to shift from the mindset of like perfectionism and absolutism, which is, not to get all broad here, but that is a fascist instinct. Right? That is something that like, that is actively against curiosity and play and all these things that are revolutionary ideas. So like, I think like the more we are like easy on ourselves, and like that is why I think like technique and artistry as two different pillars, and you on this sliding scale along it, is much easier to sort of exist in and feel comfortable in, rather than this idea that like, oh, you need to hit these certain points and this certain thing, and every mistake is sort of a reflection of your personhood or something of that kind,
Oh, that's exhausting, right? It's just like, it's not sustainable.
Yeah, and I mean, I'm sure we have talked about this previously, but like, this is something I've struggled with, and I continue to struggle with, right? Like, which is that like, I think like that my actions, whether that they are career related or music related or otherwise, they don't tie into how I should treat myself. And that definitely comes into this space, when you're struggling with the music, or on my songwriting end, when I'm struggling with some songwriting, or that doesn't necessarily mean I have to like devalue myself. And I think like, and that's what like in the realm of technique, why that's so relevant is because like the way you have broached technique with me is sort of like that technique is ultimately tied to longevity, right, and to safety, and it's not tied to like some sort of code of like some sort of code of performer that, like, you know, this is the proper way to do things and this is the illegitimate way to do things. And oftentimes, like, that's how things are taught and have been taught to me. But I think by sort of moving away from that and seeing technique and sort of these kinds of fundamental as way of taking care of yourself as the performer, I think like it's much more powerful.
Perfectionism is a fascist instinct. Gosh, that hits hard these days. And that's why I continue to return to that episode. Amer is early in his career as a performing artist, but he is wise beyond his years. And I'll end with a watch cry from my good friend and colleague, Justin Petersen, who has a reminder of why it is we do what we do as teachers. As I start this new semester, I want to cling to this next idea.
What are we doing as teachers of voice? What is it that we are literally doing? I don't think we think about that enough. We don't have those deep conversations about what does it mean from a humanitarian position to be a voice teacher? What is it that I'm hoping to instill in people in the future? I want people to gain a sense of themselves in an enlarged way that they never knew possible, to self-actualize through singing, but also to gain knowledge, appreciation, and love of beautiful things. That their life can be, that they can get so much meaning in their life from beauty, from being surrounded by loveliness, whether that's visual art or musical art. That's what I want to inculcate in my students. It's not about scales.
Right.
Scales are merely a tool to get to that place. But what good do we do our students if we train them to sing and we don't open up their souls and we don't open up who they are as human beings?
Okay, I straight up lied to you. I have one more thing I need to share with you. You know, a lot of these episodes have been very special to me, but one of the dearest ones was being able to interview my first formal voice teacher, Dr. Everett McCorvey. And in this clip, I asked Dr. McCorvey about legacy and what he still hopes to accomplish in his teaching career.
How do you think about your legacy as a teacher, and is there something that you feel like you still want to accomplish in your vocation as a teaching artist?
Well, I think the main thing, and I've been doing it now over, gosh, I don't even know, 40 years, I guess. But I will say that every day, every student is a new challenge, is a new opportunity. And so the thing that I want to be in my work, what I try to remind myself and to seek is the flexibility to continue learning. Because I think if we close ourselves off to learning, then we should just stop teaching. And so every day I learn something new. And I seek to learn new things. And so I think that that's what keeps us fresh as teachers, as performers, to continually try to learn, continually try to reinvent yourself. The thing I love about college is that every semester I get to start over again. And so we will continue, as long as we're living, we should continue to try to continue learning. And then I think if you do that, it will never get old. And I mean, I'm in St. Louis right now working with the Artist in Training program with the Opera Theater of St. Louis. And they are 10th, 11th, and 12th grade students. And the talent that they bring into the room is extraordinary. Um, and it's a huge responsibility to be able then to take that talent and to help grow that talent. And I was listening to one student yesterday, and the thing that I kept thinking in my mind, the best thing I can do for this student right now is stay out of his way, because that's part of it too. You have to know
Sure.
when to insert yourself, when you just allow the journey to happen.
Every day, every student is a new challenge, a new opportunity. As we head into this new year, may we adopt Dr. McCorvey's attitude of optimism, joy, and curiosity. It's a choice. We can do that. And let's do that together. This season, I will continue to bring you wholehearted, probing conversations that I hope will pierce you in the best possible way, that will challenge and inspire you in the ways that I have been while writing my book and producing this podcast. Specifically, we're going to talk about exploring conflict in the voice studio and how to navigate it, talk about adjusting our teaching based on a student's attachment styles, discovering how relational cultural theory can be activated in the voice studio. We're also going to review the tenets of pedagogy of kindness, deepen our conversations about culturally responsive teaching, talk about teaching collaboration, which is something I never was taught during my training in undergrad or graduate school. And I hope to also talk to some former students about what their education supported in terms of their learning goals and their goals as artists, and what maybe felt short. So lots of interesting topics and conversations coming down the pike. Hey, do you have an idea for an episode? Please sound off. You can email me at wholeheartedvoicepedagogy@gmail.com, or as always, you can find me on the socials. My handles on most platforms are at Sisco Songs and at Wholehearted Voice Pedagogy. I would love to be in touch with you. Happy New Year, everyone. More soon. Take care of you.